Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little topic, or at least a little news. And of course, the news that I have been hearing overall is that Mr. Oscar Valdez, at least overall with his side, that he has actually signed a contract to a super unification fight, I believe at the 130-pound division, the super featherweight division. And of course, that fight is to be against Mr. Shakur Stevenson. And I think that this is a very, very interesting fight. And I just thought that I would talk about what makes this fight so interesting, in my opinion. Because Mr. Oscar Valdez and Shakur Stevenson, in my view, I would probably not have them within my top 10 pound per pound, but I probably would have both of them within my top 20 to top 25. When I take a look at Mr. Shakur Stevenson, I do truly believe that he is one of the more special talents in all of boxing. Of course, I also do believe that about Mr. Oscar Valdez. But if you just had to ask me, just off the top of my head, just in looking at them for a few times, it does look like Shakur Stevenson is the more sharper fighter of the two. It does look like he is the more slicker fighter, and then all in all, that he may be the more skilled fighter. But what I will say is this: I do think that both of these gentlemen have a decent chance against each other. Both of them are decent athletes. Both of them are decently skilled. And of course, I believe that both of them are two-weight division champions. So, of course, there pretty much could not be a more perfect fight for either of them than this unification fight. And apparently, from what I'm hearing, this may very well happen sometime in April. Apparently, from what I'm hearing, April 30th. But just to talk about the fight breakdown, in my opinion, just a little bit of a breakdown. And of course, if the fight actually is 100% signed up for April 30th, I'll probably do a breakdown maybe a couple weeks, maybe a week before the fight when it comes down to it. That's probably the best time when I'll do it. But just to give a little bit of a breakdown now, who would I personally pick to win this fight? Just taking a look at it right now, I personally probably would pick that of Shakur Stevenson to win this fight. I don't think it's that necessarily that Oscar Valdez does not have a chance. I think that he is a very, very interesting fighter. I think that he's a fighter that not only has a lot of heart, but he's a person that actually does have a decent foundation of skills. But when I do take a look at the difference between the two, I do think that Shakur Stevenson is the more patient, the more intelligent overall, and that of the sharper fighter. Oscar Valdez, I think, is a very decently sharp fighter as well. But sometimes in some of his fights, I have seen certain opponents been able to get to him, such as a Conseca or even a Scott Quigg to a certain degree of other fighters. It is not impossible, in my opinion, to get to that of an Oscar Valdez. Of course, I don't think it's really impossible to get to any fighter, but when I take a look at certain faults that both fighters possess, I do believe that Oscar Valdez is the more faulty fighter. I do believe that Shakur Stevenson is the sharper fighter. Now, in my opinion, what are both fighters going to have to do, at least, with my short little snippet breakdown at the current moment in time? What would they have to do in order to win this fight? Shakur Stevenson, in my opinion, he has to make sure not to get too wild. He has to make sure to keep his hands up, kind of like in the Jamel Herring fight. I think you use his feet, which he used to, usually tends to do. I think that, at least from what I've seen, he has very, very decent feet. Like I've kind of said about Shakur Stevenson in the past, he almost reminds me of a smaller, faster version, just with not as much power as a Terrence Bud Crawford. That's what he kind of reminds me of. And he sparred Terrence Bud Crawford before, and you can tell that he's done work with him. And Shakur Stevenson, he's been sparring with a lot of decently great fighters like a Vasyl Lomachenko and overall Terrence Bud Crawford now for a very decently long time. So Shakur Stevenson more than likely is very, very ready overall to get in that very, very big fight. The big question is, will Shakur Stevenson outbox overall Oscar Valdez like a lot of people predict? I think that Oscar Valdez, in my opinion, I would give him a good solid 40% chance. I'm not going to underestimate him in this fight. I think that especially with that Miguel Berchelt performance, he showed that he was a next level fighter. He is extraordinarily talented. He does have a lot of power. This is going to be hands down the best fighter that Mr. Shakur Stevenson has ever faced. And maybe one could argue that when it comes to elite tier competition, that Oscar Valdez, of course, is more experienced. In my opinion, what is Oscar Valdez going to have to do? I think he has to try to work off his jab like he never has before. Oscar Valdez, sometimes he really likes to go in there, sometimes with wild hooks. They're not necessarily sloppy hooks, they are sharp hooks, but I think sometimes going in there and blitzing with hooks is not always the greatest of ideas. I think that you kind of have to work in there almost like what a Mike Tyson or a Rocky Marciano or a Canelo Alvarez used to do. Somewhat develop a low crouch, work in there with your jab, move your head overall, and then try to trap him up against the ropes or the corners. Even maybe if you get him in the middle of the ring, hit him with a good uppercut, hit him with a good hook to the body, up to the head. Oscar Valdez, in my opinion, a punch that he is going to want to get in this fight is that left hook. I also think overall that, he's going to have to try to go after the body very, very early on. In my opinion, what he's going to have to do is that he's going to have to make this a very rough and very ugly fight for Shakur Stevenson. I don't think that he can ever let up. I think all in all that he's going to have to kind of do what Brian Castano did to that of a Jamel Charlo in the rematch. Keep your hands up, keep the defense up, move in and out of the zone, kind of like Canelo Alvarez. Unfortunately, I don't know if he can quite do that as much as what a Canelo Alvarez can, but we'll see all in all what happens. Shakur Stevenson, in my opinion, he is going to have the better feet more than likely in this fight. It's not that from what I've seen that Oscar Valdez's feet are bad necessarily. I just think that Shakur Stevenson has incredibly fast feet. So we'll see all in all what happens. But what Shakur Stevenson is going to have to do, work off that jab, time him to the head, time him with a good 1-2. And when I say 1-2, I'm talking about the jab and the cross. That is, in my opinion, a very, very big problem for Mr. Oscar Valdez. He has a very big problem, in my opinion, avoiding the jab and the cross, especially when it comes to more disciplined fighters. We've seen that in the fight against Robert Conseco. Now, of course, Conseco, I believe that he was a orthodox fighter, and, Shakur Stevenson, he is a southpaw. Could it maybe end up different? It could. And, of course, the left hook, which Oscar Valdez, he has a tremendous left hook that is sometimes known as a southpaw killer. If he can land it, overall, that could be a very dangerous punch, against Shakur Stevenson. And sometimes Shakur, when he throws punches, sometimes all in all, he may not remember always to keep his hand up when it comes down to it. Sometimes he will get hit with a left, at least from what I remember. He fought this one African fighter not too long ago, got hit with multiple lefts. He took him well. But at the end of the day, sometimes his chin can be open to a good solid punch. But in my opinion, Oscar Valdez, if he is going to win this fight, because I think Shakur is going to come up better in this fight more than likely than what he ever has. Hopefully for Oscar Valdez, it's the same situation. Oscar Valdez, in my opinion, he has to really, work off his jab very, very well, try to move in and out of the zones, work Shakur Stevenson at angles. Yes, you are going to more than likely have to be the pressure fighter, but that doesn't mean that you have to stop moving. And a certain amount of people, they may not understand what I mean by that. When you're the pressure fighter, it's not always about just cutting off the ring. Sometimes it's also using your feet to move in and out of the zone when it comes down to it, shoot at different angles, almost kind of like a Mikey Garcia or a Canelo Alvarez when it comes down to it, kind of getting in and out of the zone here and there to not only avoid punches, but also get in certain angles and get in certain combinations, get in certain counters, get in certain punches. So I think that Oscar Valdez, he can win this fight. I just think it's going to be a very tall task. Personally, once again, I would predict Shakur Stevenson to win this fight more than likely by decision. Wouldn't be shocked if it was a knockout on either end. Wouldn't be shocked. A lot of people, they may take a look at this and they may say, well, if a knockout is happening, more than likely it goes to Valdez because Shakur Stevenson, he doesn't have a whole lot of power. Well, when you took a look at him in his last fight against Jamel Herring, and Jamel Herring, he's been stopped before, but, that was Jamel Herring pretty much at the best point in his career. And he was able to completely mop the floor with Jamel Herring. There was nothing that Jamel Herring could do in that fight. But in my opinion, Jamel Herring, by the time that he realized that what he had to do, that he had to pressure Shakur Stevenson, he was already a little bit too timid to do it and on top of that, it was a little bit too late because he had suffered so much damage by trying to outbox Shakur Stevenson in the middle of the ring. In my opinion, more than likely, trying to outbox Shakur Stevenson in the middle of the ring for Oscar Valdez is probably not going to work because I've seen certain opponents overall that actually have had success with boxing Oscar Valdez in the ring, especially if they're a little bit lengthier, when it comes down to that of an Oscar Valdez. I would have to take a look at the height and the reach of Shakur Stevenson, but if I'm guessing, just taking a look at the two, he seems to be lengthier than Oscar, but I would have to take a look at that. We'll see. But Shakur Stevenson, he's going to have to work off the end of his jab. I think Oscar Valdez is as well. Shakur, if he wants to win this fight, keep it in the middle of the ring, keep it at a distance. If Oscar Valdez wants to win this fight, in my opinion, he has to really get in the zone. He has to really get in the zone here. I don't think all in all that he can really win in the middle of the ring. I don't think that he certainly can win this fight, in my opinion, fighting at a distance like kind of what he did with Miguel Berchelt. Miguel Berchelt is a person that, sometimes he lacks head movement, and he's a person that sometimes doesn't always have the greatest articulation with his combinations, not always the sharpest of punches. You can get him overall to run into certain shots. I don't know if Shakur Stevenson is going to do that quite as much. So Oscar's going to have to make this a very uncomfortable fight for Mr. Oscar Valdez. So we'll see what happens. But it should be very, very interesting. I like both of these fighters. I do personally predict that Shakur Stevenson will win the fight. I believe that he's a smarter and sharper fighter. But I would not underestimate Oscar Valdez here. Not at all. We'll see what happens. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.